In this lesson, we will construct the base of the jacket. We cover the following points: DXF import, arrange and prepare patterns, best practices to arrange collar patterns, basic fold functions, and stitching and simulating the garment. Before we begin, you can pause the lesson here and challenge yourself. Try to complete the following steps. Apply what you've learned in the previous lessons. Import the DXF, organize the patterns in the 2D window, and create symmetrical patterns. Or continue watching and follow along. Let's get started. In VStitcher, on the main menu, select File and import the DXF. Adjust the rotation of the patterns if needed, then click OK. To enable the 2D full screen mode, place the cursor within the 2D window and press the Tab key on the keyboard. Now we can organize the patterns in the 2D window and create the symmetrical patterns. To begin, enable the shape information. First, we organize the front bodice patterns, the top bodice pattern, and the lower bodice pattern. Then place the front placket next to the front bodice patterns. Next, we place the top and bottom sleeve patterns to the right of the front bodice. Move the sleeve cuff and sleeve placket here. Next, we organize the back patterns, the yoke, mid-back bodice, and lower back bodice patterns. We can place the collar pattern above the back bodice patterns. Now create X symmetry for the following patterns: top and lower front bodice, front placket, sleeves, cuff, and sleeve placket, and the mid-back bodice 1 and lower back bodice. We need to create inner symmetry for the following patterns: collar, yoke, and middle back bodice. According to the specification sheet, there are patch pockets for this garment, but the patterns are not available. We will draft the pocket patterns in a later lesson. Note: remember to save the file as you work on the garment. Now we're ready to start the arrange process of the patterns into clusters. First, we load Olivia in the 3D window and enable the arrange mode in the 2D window. Note: to add patterns into clusters within the 3D window, enable undefined pieces in the 3D window toolbar. To learn more, refer to the link to the help site in the lesson summary. If you're not familiar with the available clusters, it is recommended to add the patterns in the 2D window. We marquee select the front patterns and drop it into the torso cluster. Repeat the process for the back bodice. Drop the patterns into the back torso cluster. Then add the sleeve patterns into the arm clusters. We can leave out the cuffs and placket patterns for now. Lastly, we add the collar pattern into the back neck cluster. Adjust the patterns within the cluster slightly. When the patterns do not appear in the 3D window, we click Prepare. Using the gizmo, adjust the position of the patterns to achieve the most optimal arrangement. Currently, the front and back bodice patterns appear wide. This may cause simulation issues once we dress the garment, as the side seams may get stuck on the avatar's arms. There are a few solutions for this situation. The first option is to scale the cluster down. At the edge of each directional arrow of the gizmo, there is a cube. Click and drag these cubes to scale the pattern piece, but only for simulation purposes. This means that even though the pattern appears smaller or larger in the prepare mode after scaling, the original 2D measurements of the pattern do not change. Thus, the pattern reverts to its original size once we dress the garment. Now we need to move the patterns in the back torso cluster closer to one another. For the front torso cluster, select the Reset button in the 3D Transformation section to reset the scale. The second solution for the simulation issue is to adjust the cluster type. We can choose cluster types from the drop-down menu in the context view. The default cluster type for the torso cluster is flat. We may adjust the cluster type to curve instead. Now the patterns sit closer to where they'll be when we dress the garment. Try out the other cluster types to see the available options. Another solution is to adjust the prepare pose of the avatar. We go to the main menu and click 3D Environment, Avatar, Prepare Pose, and select T-Pose. When we click on Prepare to refresh the 3D window, the prepare pose is updated to a T-pose. This creates more room between the arms and the body to prepare wider patterns. When preparing the jacket patterns, we want the front placket to be overlapped. For the collar, we want the pattern to wrap all the way from the back to the front. To do so, we enable Constrained Area. For this garment style, we do not have a collar band. In cases where a collar band exists, the collar would be arranged and prepared above the collar band as seen in this image. When we work with long sleeves, we may also use the Constrained Area, which we enabled for the collar. When we enable Constrained Area for the arm clusters, the sleeve patterns are constrained to the wrist of the avatar. This ensures that long sleeves do not get caught in the avatar's fingers when dressing the garment from prepare mode. Pause the lesson here, add the patterns in arrange mode, and adjust them in prepare mode. The next step is to fold the collar pattern. In order to fold a collar, we need an internal line on the pattern to fold along. We clone this edge by offset to create the internal line. Click on the edge in the context view, select Clone Edge by Offset. In the spacing field, we input the distance we want to offset the cloned edge by. In this case, a negative value results in a line that is offset inwards of the pattern. A positive value results in a line that is offset outwards of the pattern. For this collar, let's input the value to negative 1.5 centimeters. The value we input in the field determines the number of lines to copy. We only need one copy for this collar. Then we check this box to extend the cloned internal lines to the edges of the pattern. Click Apply. The line is added. Here's a quick reminder. We differentiate internal lines from edges by the color of the lines. Internal lines are pink, while the edges of the pattern are blue. Next, we select the internal line, and in the context view, under Line Properties, check the Fold option. In the 3D window, we see the fold process of the collar. Currently, it is not folding correctly. To fix it, we click on Invert Fold Direction. We want the fold line to gradually curve downwards. Enable Edit Points to edit the internal line. There are a lot of internal points along this line, which make the editing process difficult. Thus, select the line and click Reduce Points in the context view. Next, click on the point at the end of the internal line and drag it. We enable Snap to Point and Snap to Edge. This allows us to snap the point to the edge of the collar pattern like this. To create a gradual curve, delete any unnecessary intermediate points. To create a smooth curve, adjust the handles of the points. The handles are the red or blue lines that extend from the point when we click on it. In the Point Properties section under Context View, we see there are 3 curve types: sharp, curved, and smooth. A sharp point has no handles. A curved point has 1 red and 1 blue handle. Both handles can be adjusted independently without affecting the other. Lastly, a smooth point has 2 blue handles. Adjusting one handle affects the other. We use Smooth to adjust the handles and create a smooth curve for the fold line. Click Prepare to refresh the prepare mode. Before we stitch the patterns, we need to adjust the 3D layers of the patterns. Which patterns need to have their 3D layers adjusted? Is it A, only the front placket, B, front placket and collar, C, front placket, collar, and right bodice pattern? The correct answer is B. The front placket pattern overlaps right over left. Thus, we need to increase the 3D layer of the right front placket pattern. Since the default 3D layer is 2, we increase it to 3. The collar should sit above the bodice. We may also adjust this pattern to 3D layer 3. Now we start the stitching process for the garment. You may pause the lesson here to try and complete the stitching of the garment on your own. Use the next part of the video to review your steps. First, we complete all the stitches. Note that there are pleats that need to be added to the lower front and back bodice patterns, but we will stitch it as usual. There is no need to skip the sections of the edges where the pleat allowances are. For the sleeves, we leave these edges unstitched. Next, we stitch the edges that require multi-stitches. We can stitch the placket patterns closed temporarily before we add the smart buttons. Remember that you can stitch in both the 2D and 3D windows. When the stitching process is complete, we dress the garment in the 3D window. We save a manual snapshot and name it Base. We're done! For more information, check out the Browseware Help Center.